So this lesson is MLA Documentation and Formatting. And I don't want you to take notes here, because what I'm going to do is give you the big picture on how to use one of the most important tools that we have in high school and college writing, and that's the MLA Style Guide. This is going to teach you how to format your citations, your works cited page, and your essays. So, like I said, just sit back, get the big picture. You're going to learn through practice as opposed to learning through taking notes. Right, so first of all, what is documentation, right? We document sources to give respect to the originators of ideas and research for their efforts. We help our readers understand what's going on and help them in their own research. Very often I've had trouble finding sources, and then in the back of one source there's all the documentation, and suddenly I have dozens of sources. So it helps a reader out. And finally, it demonstrates the credibility, accuracy, reliability, and support in our work. Right? It shows that we're an expert and we've done our homework and we know what we're talking about. And so as I said, it benefits the people who make stuff, benefits our readers, benefits us. Definitely need to document our sources. Right, and we use a common style of documentation and document formatting to make our writing better for our readers. Speaking as someone who's had to go through dozens of research studies, in a 2 or 3 week period, I really appreciate it when all those research studies are formatted the same way. It makes it much easier for me to find things, to know what's important and know where things are. And so when these things are standardized, it makes life easier for our readers, right? Could you imagine if every book you picked up, the table of contents was in a different place, right? This book, the table of contents is on the front. This book, the table of contents is after page 100. This one, table of contents is on the back cover, right? It would just make it more difficult for us to read. So again, we're doing so much of this as a service to our reader, which is what writers should be doing. And finally, we document sources to avoid plagiarism. And that's an important idea here, right? We want to avoid plagiarism. And I talked about this in a lesson earlier in the year, but it's good to come back to this, right? You have to cite every piece of evidence in your essay, right? Even if you paraphrase, even if you put it into your own words, cite your sources. Always, always, always. And I get to the point where I don't even know if a student is using evidence or commentary if they're not citing it. So, make sure you're doing this. Right, so let's go ahead and take a tour of the MLA Style Guide. So let's go over to MrBrayman.Info. Right, so here we are at MrBrayman.Info, and we're going to go up here in the English section, and we're going to go under MLA Documentation. And the MLA Style Guide is right here. It's going to open in a new tab. It's a PDF document. And remember, you've got your controls down here. You can save it or print it if you need to, but we're just going to work off the screen here, and I'll go ahead and zoom in. Right, and so what this is a style guide. It's not something you read like a handout. It's more like a cookbook or a dictionary, right? It's kind of a reference work. And this one, is compiled from examples that were published by UNLV libraries, Go Rebels, my alma mater. And you see that it's divided into 4 parts here, right? Works cited page entries, in-text citations, works cited page formatting, formatting for the title page, body of the essay, and headers, and finally formatting for standalone paragraphs and essays without title pages. All right, so let's go down to part 1. And you see here, let's read the instructions, right? Look for the first type of source that you have. Look first for the type of source that you have, and then review the format and example. Copy down the information for the source and put it into the format. Right? Make your works cited page entry look like the example given here, right? So let's say you have a book, right? It's going to be last name, first name of the author, title of the book in italics, the city, publisher, comma, year it was published, and then the fact that it's a print source, right? So here's an example right here. And we have different kinds of books, we have ebooks, books that have multiple authors. Very often these are like your history textbook or your chemistry textbook. books in translation, for example, the Odyssey. Right, so you see, you know, there's the recipe here, and then there's an example of what it should look like. Right, a chapter or an essay in an anthology or compilation. These are things like your English textbooks. Right. Then you have magazines, newspapers, and finally web sources. Right, and web sources are still tough to do because sometimes the information isn't there. When you have a published book, all the information is on the title page or in the publication page, which is just on the other side of a title page in a book printed in the United States. There's that standardization again that makes it so nice. Right, but for websites, there's still not a whole lot of standardization. The web is much more creative than book printing, and so sometimes it can be kind of random. So let's look at this description here, right? For websites, the standard entry is given below. If any piece of information is unavailable, usually the author of the page, the date the page was last published or updated, the sponsoring organization, etc., skip it and go on to the next part of the reference, right? If it's unavailable, skip it. Right, unavailable, skip it. And go on to the next part of the reference. The assumption is that you as the author have made a good faith effort to find the information. Thus, if you do not have the information, it's just not there. It's unavailable. However, if you do not find the information your audience does, you lose credibility as an author. And, you know, not to be threatening, but I've rejected students' papers because they had missing information in the MLA Works Cited page, and I go in there to the website or whatever, and it's totally there. So, you know, it looks pretty dodgy. Whether the student was just being sloppy or dishonest, I don't know. It doesn't matter, right? So here's the basic recipe, as well as what you do if there's no publisher or publication date, right? And then date accessed right here, that's the date you looked it up or the date you printed it, right? So here's an example of a standard web page, you know, with and without a sponsoring organization, a web page with no author, right, or a newspaper or magazine article published online. And these are also usually like the ones we get out of the KCLS database or the databases at school, right? So that's the recipe that you're going to follow. You said you find the kind of source that you have, you follow the recipe, you make it look exactly like this. So let's go back over now to, right, so let's go back over and let's look at how we might do this for certain kinds of books. Right, so here's a book by one author, very commonly read by freshmen in high school. It's a chemistry book. I believe this is the chemistry book used at my high school where I teach. Right? Here's a sophomore literature book. Right? And then maybe, let's say we get newspaper, YouTube, right? So, you know, we would go into the MLA Style Guide and we'd figure out how to do the works cited page entries for these things. And here's what the finished product would look like. Right, you see we have author's last name, author's first name, a period, titles in italics, period, city, colon, publishing company. Remember, this stuff right here is always going to be either on the title page of the book or on the publication page. Right? And then the fact that it's a print source and not an ebook. Same thing here. There's the chemistry book. This one has two authors. So this one's last comma first and first last. Period. Title. With textbooks, very often we put the edition because each edition is slightly different. You know, and the city of publication, the publishing company, the date, and then that, and then the fact that it's a print source, right? Here's a short story inside of our sophomore literature book. You see this one, we have list the editor. Same thing here, city, company, year, and then the page numbers, right? These are the page numbers for that story against print. You know, websites, including videos like YouTube. And we have the author, you know, the title of the page, the title of the website, no publisher, the date it was published, It's a web source, and we looked it up on the 10th of November. Remember, this is the date you accessed it. That's the date you looked it up. Okay. And then finally, you know, like I said, video on YouTube. Right? All right, so next let's look at how we could use the MLA Style Guide to figure out how to cite these sources inside the body of the essay. So again, we're going to bounce back over. Oops. So again, we're going to bounce back over to Mr. And here we are back looking at the MLA Style Guide. All right, and this time we're going to go to in-text citations. A little bit of description here of what you need to do. You're going to have to read this on your own. I'm not going to read this to you on this video. But, you know, remember, you got to cite, whether it's a quote or you put it in your own words, you know, you have to cite it. Okay. Also, and this is a big one, so I'm going to take a moment. Remember to include the author's last full name and or the title of the source the first time you mention it in the paper. For example, the first time you mention Joshua Smith's The History of Race Cars, give Joshua Smith's full name and the title of the book, The History of the Race Cars. After that, you can just say, according to Smith, or Smith says, right? You know, same thing, you know, with web pages, you got to give the full title the first time, and then you can shorten it afterwards. Right? And so you can use either in-text or parenthetical citations. Parenthetical is just a fancy way of saying it's in parentheses. So you either put the citation at the end of the sentence. Notice the period goes after the parentheses. Or you can do it as an in-text citation. And so far this year we've been doing only in-text citations. I think those are simpler, easier to remember. Parenthetical citations are nice because it just allows the sentence to flow more quickly. Okay, so either way, it's fine. Okay, again, some more stuff that I want you to read on your own. I do expect you to know this. It's written in a language you can understand. It's not hard, so take the time to read it. Okay, as well as citing multiple works by the same author, right? And I'm going to assign you to read this page as a part of this learning cycle. So, you know, do make sure you do that. All right, so here's, you know, once again, here's our list of source types. Just like we had, you know, in part one, you just go through and say, okay, what kind of source do I have here? And then you see, you know, you've got the recipe, and then you've got an example. Right, and here we are, you know, web pages again are tricky because sometimes there's no author. So, you know, make sure you read this very carefully, pay attention to it. But that's how you're going to cite things. And, you know, your sentences inside your essay are just going to look like this. Right? The narrator states, blah, 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 citation, page number, or according to the text, blah, 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 title, things like that. Okay? But this shows you how it should look inside the page. All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint now. And so this is what it would look like inside the body of your essay, right? These are all sentences that contain evidence. These are all evidence sentences that you might see in a high school essay. And I'm not going to read them to you. Let's take a moment and go down the line. Right? And again, these are all in-text citations. They happen at the beginning of the sentence. And they're in prepositional phrases. We've been studying those, or they're just a part of the sentence itself. Bad underlining. So let's go on to the next sentence, right? Or the next slide. Sorry. So here we got parenthetical citations. These are, you know, kind of the exact same sentence that we saw on the last slide. But this one has the authors up front, and so that's why they're not over here. This time, the authors and the page number are back here. Here, author's name and page number. Remember, this one was a website, so there's no page number, right? No page numbers on the internet. There are no page numbers on the internet. Okay. Right, and one brief note, we also have footnotes. I don't know if I'm going to ask you to do any papers with footnotes this year, but when you do footnotes, you just have this little floating number. It's a superscript number at the end of the sentence, and then that matches up, and you put the complete like MLA information down here, although you notice in this case it's first name then last name for the author, right? All right, so now let's move on to document formatting. And as I said earlier, right, consistently formatted research papers make life easier for your readers. And this isn't just to benefit your teacher. When you're in college and you have to read 10 or 20 research papers to gather information for your research paper, you're going to really appreciate the standardized formatting. I know it seems silly right now and pointless, because you're only a freshman, but or maybe you're listening to this next year, or maybe you're a sophomore. But in any event, when you're young, this seems stupid and something like only English teachers care about. But believe me, someday you're going to appreciate this. Okay, so let's go back to the MLA Style Guide and look at it, a checklist and an example of how to format, your document. And so this time we're going to go to formatting for the Works Cited page. And I'm not going to read all this to you, but there's a checklist here for you to follow. All the things you need to do to your Works Cited page. Right, and some of these require a little bit of computer savvy, so we're going to practice with that in class. The rest of this, as long as you know how to use a word processor, it's not hard at all. Okay, and let me zoom out here. So this is what the Works Cited page should look like. Right, it's all 12-point Times New Roman, it's all double spaced. The title Works Cited page is up here. It's centered. Right, each entry starts against the margin, but if the entry is longer than one line, then the second line is indented, or in this case, if it's 3 lines long, the second and third lines are indented. We'll look at how to do this using the technology, using Microsoft Word. It's not hard. And so that's it. That's what a Works Cited page looks like when it's properly formatted. And here's your checklist, right? So just use the checklist. As you're going to hear me say, right, this stuff is not hard. You just have to pay attention to detail. The other thing we have here is formatting for the title page, the body, the essay, and the headers. And there's a checklist there too. Right, so again, you got this nice checklist of all these things you have to do to your essay to make sure it's properly formatted. Okay, students often think this is kind of boring and it's picky. Yeah, it kind of is. I'll admit that. But go through this checklist and you're going to end up with a well-formatted document that'll look like this. Let me zoom out just a little bit more. Right, so this is what your title page should look like. Right, so this is your heading. And then this is the title. And then this is the first page of the essay itself. Okay, notice this double space, the indenting, the jagged right-hand side. This is what we call a header. Right, it's the author, it's the name of the student who wrote the paper, and then the page number. Right, heading. Oops, let me get my pen out. Right, heading, header. Right. And it goes on like that. Okay, the other thing I have here in part 5 is an example of how to do a heading and formatting for a page, for something short without a title page. Same thing here. Notice the headings here, titles there, and this is just, like the body of a paragraph. Okay. All right, and so that's it. Lesson completed, right? And remember, proper documentation benefits everyone. It benefits your sources, your audience, and you. And this stuff isn't hard, but it does require you to pay attention to detail. So use the style guide, right? Look up your Works Cited page entries, look up how to do your citations inside the essay, look at how to format your Works Cited page, and finally how to format the essay itself. Thanks for watching.